Hello and welcome to the Sussex, Ontario Provincial Update. I'm Joe Ragusa. I'm a principal and partner here at the firm. I'm joined by Brian Zeiler-Kligman, Senior Associate in the Ontario Group. Brian, welcome.
Hello. Thank you. Look forward to this.
You might recall that in the lead up to the Ontario election and during the writ period itself, we did a weekly broadcast where we tried to update people on what was happening with the Ontario government, Ontario politics, the election. And we concluded that series on the day after the June 7th election. What we're doing today is, given that we have a new cabinet sworn in at Queen's Park, led by Premier Doug Ford, we thought we'd spend a little bit of time talking to you about who's in the cabinet, its makeup, what it all means, and in such a way that really it's difficult to do in a written document. So here we go, and as always, after this is done, please send us your feedback and let us know what you think. So we had a new cabinet sworn in on Friday, June the 29th. It was the Friday before an extraordinarily hot long weekend, and Friday itself was pretty warm as well. The Premier made a decision to have his cabinet swearing in public. For those of a certain vintage, you might recall Premier David Peterson did something similar in 1985. After 42 years of PC governments in this province. Optically, it was a nice thing to do. Several thousand people were there, some seated, some standing, and we saw footage of the Premier actually going out and shaking as many hands as possible, even in the heat.
Yeah, I was there on the lawn actually on Friday. It was interesting to see just sort of the crowd that gathered together, because obviously there were some who were just there as curiosity. This is something new, as you said. It hasn't been done in 30 years. And then there were those who were there distinctly to see Premier Ford being sworn in, and that they were very excited for that opportunity. And so it was an interesting mix. The other part of Friday, which it will also have a very significant impact going forward, is that it wasn't just the cabinet that was sworn in and announced, because we had no details of who the cabinet were before Friday morning, but also that shortly after cabinet was sworn in, the parliamentary assistants were announced, as well as a bit of a shake-up with respect to the deputy ministers. Now, with the deputy ministers, probably that's not the last of the shake-ups that will take place. But certainly there was some realignment with respect to the deputy ministers, and obviously for clients, the parliamentary assistants, particularly with the smaller cabinet, and the deputy ministers will also have a significant role to play within all of this as well.
Fair enough. So let's talk today a little bit more about the cabinet. The Ford cabinet features the Premier and 20 ministers. So we have 21 members of cabinet. That is smaller than the last Wynne cabinet, which had 28 or 29 people in it. It's notable too that this cabinet is a smaller cabinet, although it's drawn from a larger caucus. The PC's Progressive Conservatives won 76 seats on June the 7th, and from that group, the Premier has crafted a cabinet of himself plus 20. Of the 21, 14 are men, and 7 are women. And of course, there's always criticism anytime cabinets are constructed. I saw a couple of comments about how it's not as gender balanced as it might be, but look, I think that when women are the minister, there's a woman that's a Minister of Health, the Attorney General, the Minister of Education. These are substantial portfolios in the Ontario government. So I don't think there's a lot of risk of the voice of women being minimized.
I certainly would hope not. I mean, you also saw a lot of women are named as parliamentary assistants, and some of that is also a reflection of the fact, I can't remember the exact number, I think it's 6 of the 21 are rookie MPPs. 15 are previously serving MPPs, and so a lot of the new faces who are female in the PC caucus are rookie MPPs. And so a lot of them were named as parliamentary assistants, and certainly, as the administration progresses, we can expect that probably there will be some promotions within that, and as they, figure out exactly how some of the evolution of government might change ministry alignments and so forth as well.
I think that's a good point. I don't think that the cabinet that we see today is the cabinet that will be in place 4 years from now.
That's for
and
sure.
as well, one of the byproducts of having a smaller cabinet is that we today have ministers that are doing the job that used to be done by 2 and in some cases 3 ministers. Premier Ford was lucky in that he managed to elect MPPs from all regions of the province, and in cabinet making, that's important. You can't have too many from Toronto and leave out the north. You want southwestern Ontario in there. You want to have all regions of the province, eastern Ontario, big cities, smaller towns, rural, urban. And so the Premier was actually fortunate in that as he sat down to make his cabinet, he actually had people from every region of the province. So good that way, I guess, that we will have representation from right across the province. Toronto, now the Wynne government was fairly Toronto-centric. Kathleen Wynne didn't have the benefit of many rural MPPs. There were parts of the province that did not elect Liberals, even in 2014. We have 2 people from this cabinet, 2 people in this cabinet who are from Toronto. That's the Premier himself and Raymond Cho from Scarborough North. I saw a commentary on that. I don't know if you saw a commentary on that as well. It got noticed.
Well, certainly it got noticed, but it also, as you said, is a reflection that as much as there might be importance to the City of Toronto, we live in the City of Toronto, we'd like to think that it obviously has an importance to the province, but just as well, there's a recognition that you have to represent the entire province, and certainly that there is representation across the province in the caucus. Certainly it makes sense to have a cabinet that reflects that geographic diversity, and certainly the fact that the Premier himself is from Toronto, is a former city councillor, a former mayoral contender. I don't think anyone should be concerned that Toronto is going to get lost in the shuffle.
I would agree with that, and I think that extending outward, we have good cabinet representation from York region and from Durham region, and you all saw during the election campaign coverage the importance of the 905. Peel region and Halton region are not represented in this cabinet. I think that's a reflection of a couple of things. One is that most of the, if not all, of the Conservative MPPs from Peel region and Halton region are new. And as you mentioned earlier, there has been a premium put on experience in making this cabinet. Also that the people who were leadership candidates, the Christine Elliots, the Caroline Mulroneys, tended to be from York region, and so they're both in cabinet. And a guy like Rod Phillips, who's a rookie but might have, it was certainly speculated that he would run for leader, and he's got a long and storied career, is from Durham. So I think it's just the way that broke down. And again, as we said, the cabinet today is not necessarily the cabinet of 2 years or 4 years from now. People will evolve and grow into roles. We recall that in 2003, when the Liberal government came into power, that people like Kathleen Wynne and Deb Matthews were not in the first cabinet. But certainly by the time all was said and done, they had very prominent roles. Last thing that I think is worth touching on, usually in these leadership contests, there's, by virtue of who supports the winner, that there's a number of IOUs that are in place. I'll support you if, and if that happens, then I want. This was interesting because Doug Ford had, there was a period of time where Patrick Brown was out, then he was in, then he was back out. During that period, Doug Ford had 1 MPP supporting him, and coincidentally, he's the other MPP from Toronto who's in cabinet.
Raymond Cho, yes.
And after Patrick Brown officially pulled out, Toby Barrett supported Doug Ford.
Mm-hmm.
A number were neutral. You recall Vic Fedeli was interim leader, and some just didn't take sides at all. But a number did. And so I think one of the benefits that Doug Ford had when sitting down making his cabinet is that he didn't necessarily owe a lot to too many people, and as a result, had more of a free hand.
Well, certainly, and he spoke a number of times about the all-star cast that was with him, that was elected in this particular campaign, and both also when they were running, was referring to them in the same way. So, he clearly was really feeling like he had a solid team to choose from, and certainly the fact that he didn't have as many obligations that he had to put in place certainly, I think, gave him a freer hand to make sure that he felt confident with the people that he put in place.
So why don't we spend some time going through each of the cabinet ministers. We'll talk about where they're elected from, what their role is, and some things that we should look forward to. So it's alphabetical order by minister, as the government put it out. So first, we'll start with Peter Bethlenfalvy, rookie MPP, elected from Pickering-Uxbridge, after a fairly distinguished career in financial services. Mm-hmm. President of Treasury Board. So Brian, there is a board. It's a committee of cabinet. Different ministers sit on it, and the minister in charge of it is the president of Treasury Board. Once upon a time, we used to call that person the chair of Management Board, and some years ago they decided to flip the name, and those of you who follow federal politics will be more familiar with the president of Treasury Board role. So in ordinary times, not a cabinet position that gets a whole lot of profile or attention, but it may be different this time around. Yeah,
certainly an important cabinet role in every government, but with this one in particular, certainly with the line-by-line efficiencies audit that Doug Ford has promised to bring in place, this was seen as kind of a critical role and very much hand-in-hand with the Minister of Finance role in finding that efficiency and being able to make sure that the Ford administration would live up to its promises to find those efficiencies and not to lay off people in massive ways with that. Certainly when the Wynne government was going after the Don Drummond report proposals on how to find efficiencies and bring the budget into line, Deb Matthews, as president of the Treasury Board, was seen as a very powerful player within the cabinet table, and so certainly we should probably expect Mr. Bethlenfalvy to play a similar role. Similarly of interest, so we mentioned that the deputy ministers were announced on that same day, that Nancy Kennedy was announced as the deputy minister for the Treasury Board Secretariat, and this was actually a recruitment away. She had been in the Ontario Public Service and as an associate deputy minister of finance previously, and was very highly respected, and had actually just been named as the president and CEO of the Ontario Cannabis Retail Corporation, and is now back in the Ontario public sector as a deputy minister with this.
Okay. The other thing we'd add too is that the president of Treasury Board tends to lead, or at least be very heavily involved in, contract negotiations with public sector unions. So think teachers, think nurses, think correctional officers. We think we're going to see and hear a lot from Peter Bethlenfalvy in the next little while, more so than perhaps some of his predecessors at Treasury Board. Yeah. All right, the next minister we want to touch on briefly is Raymond Cho. Raymond Cho is now the Minister for Seniors and Accessibility. Of note, again, the only MPP that supported Doug Ford from the outset of the leadership process. But I kind of watched Raymond Cho because he was elected in a by-election in 2016 in a riding that the Liberals had held forever. And he won it at a time when the PCs did not hold a single seat in the 416. So he's kind of an interesting person. He will be, he was a municipal politician.
For a long time, yeah.
25 years?
Quite some time, yeah.
Something like that. And he, as Minister for Seniors and Minister for Accessibility, now these are again, roles that more than one person would have had before. But I think we can expect that Raymond Cho will be speaking a lot to the new Minister of Health and speaking a lot to the new Minister of Community and Social Services. It's not a line ministry, but it's an important one.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he's got a big role to play, and we wish him well. It's not going to be an easy role, especially if if expenditures are tightened up a little bit. He's really an advocate in cabinet.
For a variety of things. I mean, he's also now in charge of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, which had a very profound impact in the previous government in terms of the business environment here. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that particular act.
And at a time when the new government has promised thousands of new long-term care beds and a number of initiatives that were in the platform that will affect seniors, I think we can expect that Minister Cho will be consulting with stakeholders a fair bit.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, let's talk next a little bit about Steve Clark. Now, Steve Clark is not a rookie MPP, obviously.
Nor a rookie in politics. He was elected as a mayor when he was 22. So he's a lifer, as we say, I guess.
He was Canada's youngest mayor.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So he's re-elected from the riding of Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes. So he's an incumbent. He was quite strong in opposition. Mm-hmm. He was one of two deputy leaders under Patrick Brown, and he becomes Ontario's Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. I'm always curious when a former municipal politician gets elected provincially and becomes Minister of Municipal Affairs. Is that better or is it worse? Because he knows what these mayors and municipal leaders are going to come forward with, but at the same time, he was there. So it's a little tougher to kind of fend them off, but I think he'll do all right. What do you think?
I think so too, and certainly he's, the AMO conference, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, they have their annual conference, which is taking place in Ottawa this year, coming up in about 6 or 7 weeks, and so that's going to be a very quick coming out with respect to the role. Certainly. There will be lots of delegations from all municipalities around the province who will be there with various asks, and certainly we've got a number of different folks that we've spoken with who are going to be going to that particular conference. They're looking for contact with a number of different ministries, including the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, for some of the issues that they've got that they'll be bringing forward. So he'll be needing to learn his brief very quickly. And he'll be meeting many of his stakeholders very quickly as well.
Now we should mention too, we put in our write-up that when Doug Ford took someone who's not from the Greater Toronto Area and not from Hamilton and not from Ottawa, not from one of the big cities, because the backlog for housing repairs, the housing infrastructure, the public housing, would put a minister from, say, the GTA to Toronto under tremendous pressure. Mm-hmm. And I think that selecting a minister who's not from one of the three big urban centers is actually good, because the person can make their decisions based on, say, evidence and not on the pressure that he or she would feel from living there, from being in the middle of it. That's my view on it. Maybe someone would flip that around and say, how could you truly understand it if you're not from there? But I don't think so. I think housing is right across the province, municipal affairs across the province, and certainly seen in the past when a Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing is from the GTA, it's not easy.
No, and certainly this is another instance where there were two ministers under the Kathleen Wynne government. That government had actually split Municipal Affairs and Housing into two separate ministries, and it was Peter Milshin, who was from the GTA, who was the minister, and obviously that was to put in place the Fair Housing Plan, and obviously all of the various pieces around that. But the fact that they're putting that back together again is a reflection of some of the efficiencies that they're trying to gain within this government, but also the fact that they're putting someone in place who is not from the GTA also reflective of what we'll probably see with respect to the ministry.
That's a good point, as well as municipal administration and the public housing stock. The whole area of landlord and tenant relations now comes under Steve Clark's purview. So it'll be an interesting one to watch. Again, he is a veteran. He was a mayor. He was an MPP. He was deputy leader for the PC caucus. So certainly no newbie to politics, and should have a pretty good grasp of the set of issues as he heads down this road. All right, let's talk a little bit about Christine Elliot. So Christine Elliot, we have a soft spot for Christine Elliot for a couple of reasons. One is she agreed to come on our Ontario election show and did a great job and talked to us about her passion for healthcare on that show. And you can actually see the clips from that interview on both our website and on our social media channels. So Christine Elliot was an MPP, left for a while, came back, tried to win her party's leadership in March of 2018, actually got 50% of the votes or so, but because of the way that system works, she did not emerge as leader, but she did come back. She had always run in Whitby. And of course, when she left, that seat got filled by another PC member, Lauren Coe. And so she ran in Newmarket Aurora against the cabinet minister, Chris Ballard, who was the Minister of the Environment, and won. So she now comes out of that having become the Minister of Health, which I think is what she would have wanted. She is the Deputy Premier. She has the support of about half the people in that party, although I don't want to suggest anything. Everyone is certainly closed ranks around Premier Ford, but she is a force. And if you watch the election, because I know you did, in the last 10 days or so, wherever you saw Doug Ford.
Yeah, you saw Christine Elliot.
You saw Christine Elliot, and she was in demand. She was opening people's campaign offices for them, other candidates. So this is a good appointment, I think. In addition, so when she was health critic, we dealt with her a lot. And she was very open, and you could tell she knew the file. It was never a sort of, yeah, come in, I'll give you your 30 minutes and then send you on your way. She actually knew this stuff, and she actually cared about it.
The passion is another, not just expertise, but passion that's certainly has come across whenever she speaks about these issues. Even when she was running for the leadership, she spoke about these issues, and again with a lot of passion behind it.
She is someone that, as well as having been the patient ombudsman, she and her late husband established the Ability Center in Whitby, which is for people with disabilities. So I think there's a genuine desire to do what's good for people in Christine Elliot. Having said that, every Minister of Health has to run up against budgetary constraints. Cost containment has been in place for a long time. She's not, unfortunately, going to have all the resources that she would like to have, as no Minister of Health ever does.
Not just in Canada, but worldwide.
Exactly. The pressures are tremendous. We've already seen over the weekend a change to the Pharmacare for Youth, or OHIP Plus program. The government will soon be procuring 15,000 new long-term care beds. There is a commitment to end hallway medicine. So there's a lot going on, and I'm encouraged by the fact that it's someone that at Health that will have both a shorter learning curve and, as you mentioned, the passion for the job.
Well, and certainly, obviously, the clout within there. This is clearly, with perhaps the exception of finance, this is going to be the most high-profile role within cabinet, just given the generally Ontarians' view of the healthcare system, but also especially within this election, where within the platform, these are really where the most focused commitments came into place. And so we've got dollar amounts attached here with respect to mental health. We've got bed commitments with respect to long-term care beds, and obviously, given the financial pressures, there's going to be a lot of give and take that's going to have to happen with the Ministry of Finance. So the fact that you've got someone who's so passionate, but someone who also with the clout who can get these through at the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care is critically important.
Yeah. I'll only add to that what Brian said, that there were a number of healthcare providers that were hoping that Christine Elliott would become the Minister of Health. So expectations are quite high for her, and I'm sure that as the budget making process unfolds, that there will be, as there always is, many competing interests for the health dollars. But I think she'll do well there, and good luck to her. The new finance minister for Ontario is Vic Fedeli. Brian, certainly no stranger to us, no stranger to Ontario politics. Re-elected, so not a rookie, from the riding of Nipissing, the largest urban center. People, if you don't know Nipissing, think North Bay and the area around North Bay. Vic Fedeli was a successful businessman in the community. And
very proud of where he's from as well. So that's definitely someone who will regularly remind folks of that and the fact that it's an important part of Ontario.
Was the mayor of North Bay, has been MPP for Nipissing. Importantly, when all that happened in January with Patrick Brown and his leadership, I think Fedeli, it certainly looked like he might throw his hat into the ring. Indications were that he would. He subsequently decided to be the interim leader of the party, and as he put it, clean up the rot. I'm not making any of that up. And did a lot of work while the PC leadership process went on. So by taking on the role of interim leader, he essentially surrendered any aspirations of becoming the elected or permanent leader. Certainly in opposition, prior to becoming the interim leader, was a dogged critic of the Ontario Liberals, was the finance critic.
And certainly very well versed in provincial finances. So some folks watching this might have been on his newsletter emailing list, where on a fairly regular basis there were the Fedeli's financial news, and it was going into very explicit and detailed accounts of the provincial finances. So certainly someone who, again, comes to this role, which is a critical role within this cabinet, with a desire for the role, but also an expertise within the role as well.
I agree. I don't think there's anyone in that caucus who would have had a shorter learning curve to get into the province's numbers than Vic Fedeli, because he was pretty detailed. I mean, I saw times when he would quote chapter and verse back to people in the government. And so actually on page 76, right in the second last paragraph, this is what you said. People would be kind of fumbling. So he was pretty dogged, pretty good. I think that before too long, and by the way, the legislature is going to resume in July, which is unusual for a short session.
Well, next week.
Yeah.
So I think it's the 10th, they had said, for the speaker to be elected, and then the 11th for the speech from the throne.
So I think we'll before too long hear Vic Fedeli tell us that the $6.7 billion deficit number was not accurate. This is not because it's Vic Fedeli. This is because it's a new government, and this is what new governments do. And that, in fact, the real deficit number is something much higher than that, and that a lot of work needs to be done. So Fedeli will be busy. I think we can certainly expect the Liberals will be up for some pretty severe criticism from him as he dives into it. But look, we have a new government that pledged to find deficiencies, that there are tax cuts coming, there are new expenditures coming. It's a big job, and
absolutely.
If he manages to do everything that his party campaigned on, and keeping in mind, it's a 4-year plan. So not everything that the PC party put out during the election is expected to be implemented in year 1. That's not realistic. It's a 4-year plan. But even given him 4 years, that's a tall order.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be a tall order for anyone.
He's got a big job ahead of him, but we wish him good luck. So, alphabetically, after Fedeli comes Ford. So Doug Ford, just think about this for a second. On January 22nd of this year, he was Doug Ford, private citizen, who was contemplating, signaling that he was going to run to be the mayor of Toronto. On January 23rd, everything in Ontario politics changed. By March 10th, he was the leader of the PC party. And on June 7th, became the Premier of Ontario.
Pretty big turnaround in a short period of time.
Lots to do, and not a lot of time to do it. And I think somebody said, from the time he became leader on March the 10th to the time that the election took place was 87 days.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
In total. So in that time, Doug Ford had to put together his leadership, his team. He had to win that process. Then he had to put together his campaign team. And I'll say this, he's done really well, because in political parties there's always different subgroups and who likes who. But I view that he managed to bring together some people that had experience from having worked in Ottawa under the Conservative government led by Stephen Harper. He brought together the elements that have kind of always been there of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario. And finally, he brought in the hardcore Ford Nation people that had supported Rob Ford and then supported Doug Ford, and managed to put them together, and it worked. He won big.
Absolutely.
And he now finds he's the MPP for Etobicoke North. We were flagging all the rookies. He's a rookie
yeah.
MPP. He sat one term as a City of Toronto councillor.
Well, as was pointed out, that he's only the second premier who has never been a sitting MPP prior to being premier, and the first one, of course, being the first premier of Ontario.
Right, at Confederation.
Yeah, so there's a big job there. There's a big role.
There is, and I think he's certainly not wasting any time in implementing his agenda. And as we mentioned, there'll be a summer sitting, there'll be a fall sitting, and we'll see. We'll see what lies ahead. And Cabinet came together in 3 weeks, and the work has begun. So good luck, Premier Ford. We'll look forward to working with your government. The next minister we want to talk about is Mary Lee Fullerton. She is a rookie, first-time MPP, elected from Canada Carleton in Eastern Ontario. She assumes the role of Minister of Training, Colleges, and Universities. Brian, this is a return to more what that ministry kind of was always called prior to Deb Matthews taking it over, and it became Advanced Skills Development.
Yeah, Advanced Education and Skills Development, yeah. So this is a little more back to, not meant in any derogatory way, but back to more plain speak. It's clear what the ministry actually is doing.
Well, and I think that's probably a good indicator of how the government will govern. And I think we'll start to see, even in the names of legislation, that it'll be in language that the rest of us understand. By the way, Brian is a lawyer, I should say. He actually understands legislation and translates it for people like me. So Mary Lee Fullerton, she's a physician. So certainly the product of higher learning. I think she actually went to medical school in Ottawa. Listen, the previous government put a lot of time and money and resources into post-secondary education. That whole highly trained, highly skilled workforce. I think it's encouraging that this minister also has training in there, so perhaps the world of apprenticeships, working with employers. Let's talk about what you need. Let's talk about giving our people the skills to get there. Not a ministry that, again, often makes the big splashy headlines, but we had a strike at York University. Certainly nobody in government or in the sector wants to see more strikes in the college and university system. So the new minister will certainly have to use her skills in diplomacy to make sure that people stay in the classroom, stay at work, and things go well.
Absolutely, and this is certainly from a PC government perspective, a focus on training as apprenticeships and other skills-based training programs have always been a big focus, and so this is this is going back a little bit to some of their, for lack of a better term, grassroots policies of where the PC party would look to go, and making sure that recognition that skills in Ontario, and important skills in Ontario for a skilled workforce, don't always just require college programs or university programs. There are other means to get those, and certainly anyone who's trying to find a contractor or any other construction type trade certainly can appreciate the fact that there is a great demand for all of these skilled trades.
So we'll see how the new minister does. There'll be a bit of a learning curve for her in the role of MPP, certainly, and as minister. So we wish her well. Let's talk a little bit about Ernie Hardeman. So we like Ernie. Ernie was the municipal affairs critic on.
It's hard not to like Ernie.
Yeah, that's true. During the time when a couple of contentious files came our way. So Ernie Hardeman, interesting man. First elected in 1995 as part of the Mike Harris government. So the last time we had a PC government in Ontario, it was elected in 1995 and re-elected in 1999 and served until 2003. Ernie Hardeman is one of two people in the current PC caucus that were part of that government. The other being Jim Wilson, who we'll talk about later. So Ernie Hardeman is now Ontario's Minister of Agriculture and Food and Rural Affairs. Talk to us a little bit about Ernie and what lies ahead for him on the public sector agenda.
Well, certainly he's no stranger to agriculture or rural affairs. We have particular clients in the agricultural sector, and Mr. Hardeman would always comment about the fact of how rich his constituency is in various agricultural pursuits, be they dairy, be they other foodstuffs. So certainly this is a bit of a natural portfolio for him. He knows the field well. The stakeholders there know him well. And generally speaking, from speaking with our clients in the agricultural sector, that there is a certain amount of comfort in having Ernie Hardeman in place as the agricultural minister.
All right. Now, Ontario is certainly not at the negotiating table for NAFTA.
No.
But it is Canada who does that, but it's an important component part of it. We have a pretty healthy dairy industry, dairy farming industry in this province. The White House is certainly beating the drum that they want to see changes made to our supply management system here. It's going to be a tough job for an Ontario Minister of Agriculture to continue to protect it without being at the table. But certainly we saw Jeff Leal do what he could do in the last government. Is it safe to assume Ernie will take the same kind of approach?
I would believe so. We've already seen the Premier, when he was the Premier designate, saying that Ontario is going to stand shoulder to shoulder with the federal government in protecting Ontario workers. And I wouldn't expect to see anything else really in this particular role for the NAFTA negotiations. At least it's the MPP's role is really to remind the MPs of the importance of these things and make sure that they're making the right noises of what needs to be done and what needs to be agreed to at the negotiating table.
And as Minister of not only Agriculture and Food, but also Rural Affairs, there will be a healthy amount of politics in Ernie Hardeman's job. So one of the things that Doug Ford managed to do was to secure and hang on to the Conservatives' rural base, while at the same time growing into urban and suburban areas, but without compromising what that party had in rural Ontario, which is not easy to do. So I think part of Ernie Hardeman's job will to ensure that folks in rural Ontario are kind of looked after and feel good about things. And so it's not just going to be about things like supply management for him. There's going to be a healthy amount of politics, I think, too, in his role.
Absolutely.
And he is kind of a, you got to meet him. Like you can't walk out of there and say, be unhappy with Ernie Hardeman. He's just that kind of guy. So we wish him well. I'm sure that he'll do a good job. And on behalf of those clients that you referenced, we look forward to working with him. Ontario's new Minister of Tourism, Culture and Sport is Sylvia Jones. Sylvia Jones is re-elected from the riding of Dufferin-Caledon. Certainly no stranger to provincial politics. As someone that served as deputy leader of the PC caucus, she has also got a number of private members' bills passed. Mm-hmm. I think she knows her way around the legislature.
She does.
And is someone that I think even the people in other parties would hold her in some esteem, some regard, as someone that knows what she's doing. Let's talk a little bit about what's ahead for her in this portfolio, tourism, culture, and sport.
So there's a little bit of sort of a good news factor, hopefully, with respect to this portfolio. Talking about numbers of visitors to Ontario, tax dollars brought in from tourism, which obviously is a very significant industry here, so forth. One of the interesting things that we saw was in the Deputy Minister announcement that came out on Friday. There was a very specific mention with respect to the Deputy Minister for Tourism, Culture and Sport that they were particularly invested with the task of increasing youth involvement in sports. And it was noted that this was a particular interest of the Premier's. So clearly that's also going to be part of Sylvia Jones's portfolio of not just providing those beneficial numbers and the good news stories on what's happening with respect to Ontario's very vibrant art scene and tourism, but also finding ways to make sure that the sport part of the ministry is prominent and that it's finding new ways to get youth active and engaged in these sports.
All right. And we know that governments of all stripes, at all levels, love tourism. The reason they love tourism, one of the reasons they love tourism, is that they get their revenues right away. Sales taxes, payroll taxes, they come into provincial coffers immediately, unlike, say, income taxes where you got to wait till year end and people file and so on. So tourism does have the ability to boost provincial finances quickly. So Sylvia Jones is our new minister there, and we look forward to working with her as needed. So Lisa MacLeod is someone that is now doing the job that used to be done by 3 people. So it goes without saying, she is not a newly elected or rookie MPP. She's been around for a while. She represents the riding of Nepean, just outside of Ottawa. And she is now Ontario's Minister of Children, of Community and Social Services, and the minister responsible for women's issues. And there were times where we had 3 people do those jobs under the previous government. So where do we start? So the Ministry of Children and Youth Services has now been folded into this one. Community and Social Services has always been around. So this is the ministry that has things like Ontario Works, social assistance programs, the Ontario Disability Supports Program, and a number of programs, say, that pay for things for people who can't necessarily pay for them themselves. She is someone that in opposition was always prominent.
Feisty.
Yeah, you never had to look too long or too hard to find Lisa. She was very vocal critic of the previous government.
And she was also one of the very prominent MPPs that was touring with the Premier during the campaign when he was highlighting the strength of his bench. So it wasn't surprising that we were going to see her in cabinet.
And I recall that shortly after he became leader, maybe even the next day, he was in a parade.
Yeah. And
there was Lisa MacLeod walking shoulder to shoulder with him. So I think that this is going to be a really interesting portfolio to watch. it is going to be a lot of work, but you never get the sense from Lisa MacLeod that it would be too much or she wouldn't want to. She seems like someone that would embrace the challenge.
Absolutely.
It's almost though that she's almost become the minister for people that be they young people. The Ministry of Children and Youth Services is not one that got a lot of profile or attention or was in the news a lot, but it did meaningful work. Community and Social Services does meaningful work. And as a minister responsible for the status of women or women's issues, that's 52% of the population. So there's a lot of people that are going to be depending on Lisa. I think that as well as being an administrator, as ministers are charged with, she will by necessity be an advocate for children, for women around the cabinet table. There's going to be times when she's going to be looking for funding enhancements, and where she used to be sort of side by side with Vic Fedeli, and they still are, Lisa's going to have to really go to bat, especially at a time of, if not quite austerity, then at least expenditure control. I'm really curious to see how this unfolds. This was one of the appointments when cabinet was announced that I said, wow, that's asking one person to do a lot.
That's a lot.
So again, and to those people that are concerned that, the cabinet of 21, there's 14 men and 7 women, the Deputy Premier, the Minister of Health, the Attorney General, Lisa MacLeod is the Minister for so many things, the Minister of Education are all women. And I don't think that you need be too concerned that women will be minimized or somehow overlooked in the cabinet decision-making process. I can't see that happening because of the way that it's made out. It's more than just sheer numbers. So Lisa MacLeod, the Minister for many things in the Doug Ford government. All right. We have a new Minister of Infrastructure in Ontario. It's Monty McNaughton. Re-elected.
Another long-serving MPP.
Right. From the riding of, this is one of those, Lambton, Kent, Middlesex. Apologies, Minister. So, someone that once ran for the leadership of the PC party and lost to Patrick Brown, but has a bit of a following. Certainly, most people would consider Monty McNaughton to be right of center in his politics.
Bit of a social conservative.
I don't think that's unfair. I think that most people would agree with you. So now he becomes the Minister of Infrastructure, which is really agnostic to that sort of thing. That they're this is the ministry that delivers the big projects in this province. The big brand new hospitals, subways. It's just, if it's a big project, Infrastructure Ontario is probably involved. We've even had a case where it wasn't an infrastructure project, but another ministry that actually called upon IO's, Infrastructure Ontario's expertise to negotiate to help them out. So this is the numbers in the last Liberal budget, so second last and last, were mind-boggling. I think we were up to 12 years and $180 billion.
Yeah, I think it was 14 years. The years kept shifting, the numbers kept shifting, but ultimately with the PC commitments, they were looking to match what the Liberals had committed to with respect to infrastructure, and then there was also that additional commitment of $5 billion. Obviously, $5 million would not get very far on building subways, but $5 billion more towards building subways. So, this is a massive portfolio, as you said. This is a very high spending portfolio, but hopefully high spending in a good way, one that adds productivity and growth to the province. And certainly, it's also one where we've seen previous ministers, grow from this particular role. we had Kathleen Wynne was a Minister of Transportation when there was a significant infrastructure component to it, and then moved on to the premiership. And not suggesting that Monty McNaughton is the next Premier of Ontario, but just that this is a good role for him in which to also gain some prominence and have a good seat at the table.
It will be interesting too because of Infrastructure Ontario's model, the alternative finance procurement model. There is private sector money gets brought into things where the private sector is called upon to design, build, finance, and maintain things like hospitals, and in return they get a 20-year or longer revenue stream to do it. So while not all of those billions are necessarily government capital, there is private sector capital. The government still has a large role to play in procuring these mega contracts for ministries and organizations that are not necessarily well equipped to run procurements like that on their own. So I think it's going to be a fun time at infrastructure. I'm looking forward to, because we now have a premier that's big on subways. So I want to see the dynamic between Premier Ford, Monty McNaughton at Infrastructure, Steve Clark at Municipal Affairs, and John Yakubuski over at Transportation to make all of these subways work. There's a number of projects that have been announced but not necessarily underway yet.
Mm-hmm.
Things like LRT, for example. Yep. So we'll be curious to watch and see if...
and high-speed rail is another big example.
Right. We'll be curious to see if these things go forward or if it's just going to be more subways, and some of these projects that were previously announced may not, in fact, go forward. So, Monty McNaughton, our new Minister of Infrastructure in the province of Ontario, good luck to you, and we'll be in your office soon, we hope. All right. Speaking of leadership candidates, we have a new Attorney General in Ontario under Premier Doug Ford. It's Caroline Mulroney. She was a leadership candidate, rookie MPP, first time, elected from the riding of York Simcoe. Like Doug Ford, comes from a political family. Of course, she's the daughter of former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, but...
And I thought you were going to start referencing Ben Mulroney as the political side of the family.
No, although is it his wife that's friends with Meghan Markle?
Yeah.
Is it? Okay, but we digress. So in a move that's not really surprising, I mean, I think we expected Caroline Mulroney to get something significant.
Absolutely.
She did show well in the leadership process. She does have people in the PC party that are supporters of hers. But again, you see, this is another York Region senior cabinet minister, like Christine Elliott, like Peter Bethlen-Falvey. Like, York Region did really well. Michael Tobolo, who's another minister, is from York Region. So having said all of that, what can we say about Caroline Mulroney? We learned a little bit about her during the leadership.
Yeah, certainly I think there's a lot of anticipation about her as Attorney General, and it's a really good portfolio for her. It's an important portfolio. We know that one of the first things that she'll be charged with is taking on the federal government with respect to the carbon tax. Good luck on that front. Doesn't seem, from analysis I've seen, that that's a particularly winning battle, but certainly one that will be undertaken, and that's going to be her first major piece that she'll be working on. But it's also one that's high profile, but will give her an opportunity to grow and have good profile as well. So it's a good I certainly think a good appointment for her. Obviously, the background that we've seen, there's both a legal background, there's a business background. Obviously very accomplished in both. So certainly a lot of high things are expected of Caroline Mulroney, and certainly by putting her in the Attorney General's office from the start, giving her a good opportunity to accomplish those.
We don't want to neglect the fact that she's also been named the Minister responsible for Francophone Affairs, which is not an insignificant job in the province of Ontario. So yes, I guess we're going to court with the federal government over carbon taxes. I would only remind people that regardless of where you sit on the carbon tax issue, They campaigned on this, getting rid of it, and they won.
It was clear what they intended to do.
Yeah.
So it's no one can argue that they were caught unaware.
This is right. Now, so the Ford government has already begun to dismantle the cap and trade system. So for those who are not as close to it, the federal government said to provinces, either put in a carbon pricing regime or we will put one in. The Ford government is saying we're doing away with the cap and trade system that the Wynne government had put in, and we will fight the federal government if they try to put one in Ontario because we don't want one. And I think, is it Saskatchewan is of a similar mind?
Well, Saskatchewan's of a similar mind. So is Jason Kenney in Alberta, although he's not in power in Alberta. And in Manitoba as well, they had indicated an aversion to the federal carbon tax situation, but they've decided that it was not a winning proposition, and so they're moving along with it.
All right, so Caroline Mulroney, Minister, we wish you well in your new role as Attorney General. Just should throw in too that as well as court things, the Attorney General also regulates a number of professions
Absolutely.
in this province, and we've had dealings with that ministry before on behalf of certain not health professionals that are regulated through MAG. So there you have it. The new Attorney General is Caroline Mulroney. So Brian, we have a new Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks named Rod Phillips, who's a newly elected MPP, but again, no stranger to politics, from the riding of Ajax. So before we get into it, the first thing that somebody said to me as soon as this release came out was they took climate change out of the name of the ministry. I don't think that was an oversight or a mistake.
I don't think it was also unexpected within that. And this is another one where we've had the ministry itself, the name has changed. And whereas with, say, training colleges and universities, it was a reversion back to an original name, this is one where it's giving us a bit of an indication, I would suggest, as to where the priorities are going to be with respect to the ministry. So, we're looking at the Ministry of the Environment, climate change is out, conservation is in, and the parks are in as well. So there's a certain component of keeping parks beautiful, encouraging people to make use of Ontario's parks within that, but also the focus on conservation, and this was mentioned in Doug Ford's platform as well, that there were going to be a number of initiatives that we're going to be putting forward. So it wasn't we're completely ignoring the environment, even though we're doing away with cap and trade. There is still going to be programs put in place to improve the environment. They're just of a different nature.
So Rod Phillips is someone who, he was written about a lot. There was a lot of speculation that he would run for the leadership of the PC party after Patrick Brown stepped down. This is someone that was everything from Mel Lastman's chief of staff when the City of Toronto amalgamated, that first amalgamated council. He has actually been the CEO of the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation, the chairman of Post Media Financial. He ran Morneau Chappelle for a while, or Chappelle Morneau Chappelle. Yeah. Anyways, it was Chappelle. So this is somebody that has a lot of background. He's got quite the resume. But let's look at what he's up against. So first of all, he's got to oversee the dismantling of the cap and trade regime. The Green On program that was put in place, so cap and trade raises money from emitters, and legislatively all that money had to be spent on environmentally beneficial things like Brian could get new windows, I could get better insulation, and the government would help me pay for it. So that's now gone. We were in a market with Quebec and California on these cap and trade credits.
They're apparently going to be suing us soon on that leaving the cap and trade program. There's a lot of technicalities to this, but we're leaving at a point that leaves them somewhat exposed, which is part of the issue.
And a number of Ontario businesses that have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on these credits under the cap and trade system
are trying to figure out what exactly was happening with
where
them.
do I take this now, and do I get a refund?
Yeah.
So this is going to be a big, challenging job for the new minister, Rod Phillips. It's not one of the, I don't think, certainly not one of the easier or happier places to be, at least in the first couple of years of this new government. So he's actually going to need to draw on a lot of that experience that he's had before entering politics. So that's a good thing. I think that we've got somebody who's kind of been out there in the world a little bit that is now able to deal with these things.
Absolutely, he'll definitely need to call upon his business savvy and experience in dealing with, some, for example, the potentially worthless credits. Who knows? With respect to the cap and trade program, and how to deal with the companies who are coming and knocking, asking about that. So yeah, certainly will be a difficult task.
So there you have it, Rod Phillips, our new Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, which used to be at Natural Resources and now got moved to this ministry. So I think you're right, it's a kind of how we go at the environment is reflected in the name. So good luck, Minister Phillips, and I'm sure you'll be hearing from people at Sussex very soon. All right, so we have an interesting new Minister of Energy, Northern Development and Mines, and Indigenous Affairs, named Greg Rickford. So before I ask you to talk about him, again, this is a job that used to be done by 3 people. We used to have a Minister of Energy, and another person was the Minister of Northern Development and Mines, and another person was the Minister for Indigenous Affairs. All of that now comes together under Greg Rickford, who, although he's elected to the Ontario legislature for the first time, is not new to elected politics.
No, had previously been an MP, sorry, and had previously actually served in a similar role federally, or at least the northern part federally. And this is another one where, so both like Lisa MacLeod, where it's a minister of many things, but also like Rod Phillips, where we've got a particular ministry, this one being Indigenous Affairs, where there was a name change, and we've now gone back to sort of a previous name that had been in place for, Indigenous Affairs, but the fact that reconciliation and other parts are taken out, probably also a reflection of how this this particular ministry will be approached with the new government.
Right. So as Brian mentioned, Greg Rickford was a minister under the government of Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and now represents Kenora Rainy River, which once upon a time was Howard Hampton's riding. Mm-hmm. Was an NDP riding for a long time and provincially, and the Conservatives have managed to win it back. So I've seen some early commentary from people that find it strange that Indigenous Affairs and Energy would be together under the same minister, but I know from experience here at Sussex that
they're all intertwined.
Our firm has worked on some really great projects where First Nations communities and energy companies have gotten together and done some pretty good things. So I don't subscribe to the thinking that one has to be to the exclusion of the other. So if anything, it's the Northern Development and Mines part that one of these things is not like the others.
Depending, because certainly the Ring of Fire, which is, I'm sure, going to be part of the early priorities for Minister Rickford, that certainly that has a large Indigenous Affairs component to it as well. So there are, as with energy, there's a lot of Indigenous Affairs issues, wrapped up in all of these portfolios.
It'll be fun to watch. Doug Ford said that he's going to build the road to the Ring of Fire, even if he has to get on the bulldozer himself. So we'll wait and see what's ahead. But certainly for the new minister, Greg Rickford, who will also have carriage to quote unquote clean up the hydro mess. That was one of the main things that the PC party campaigned upon. We'll see how he does. I mean, like every new minister, we'll give him a chance and hope for the best, and we look forward to working with him. So we have a new Minister of Labour, Laurie Scott, returning from Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock. Laurie Scott is someone that is no stranger to provincial politics, been around for a long time. She's the Minister of Labour. Now, the Minister of Labour, it'll be interesting to watch because there's a few things coming down the horizon that the minister should be prepared for.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, beyond Laurie Scott's definite abilities as a politician. She had championed a number of significant issues when she was in opposition, particularly with respect to sex slave trade and seeking greater protections and enforcement in that area. We certainly expect that there's going to be a lot of activity with the Ministry of Labour. I'm sure those watching will remember that Bill 148 came into effect last year. That was the bill which most people recognize as being the one that raised the minimum wage to $14 an hour.
And then 15.
Well, it will be 15 as of January 1st, 2019, assuming that no amendments are made to that legislation, which we expect will happen. But there were also a whole raft of other very significant labor changes, both with respect to scheduling provisions, as well as union and certification requirements and stipulations and so forth within there. So, we are expecting a fairly significant review of that legislation, because it was a very sweeping piece of labor legislation that was brought in place by the Wynne government. So we do expect a lot to happen there, and even though it's not necessarily one of the prominent priorities put forward by the Ford government because of timing, just by necessity, it's going to have to be dealt with in a quick fashion.
We should point out too that as Minister of Labour, so there's the kind of labor relations part of things, which involves unions. And look, let's be honest, the last time there was a PC government, labor relations were not the greatest. Mm-hmm. And there's also the employment standards part, the non-unionized workforce in Ontario. So you're right, the minimum wage, they said they won't turn it into $15 an hour come next January, so something's got to give there. So, but certainly he's a capable politician. Mm-hmm. And well
respected, well liked.
I think so, within the caucus and even outside of it. Mm-hmm. So challenging days ahead, but I think she'll be up for it, and we wish her well. So Brian, a ministry that you've had quite a bit of dealings with in your work here on behalf of clients, the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services. Mm-hmm. The new minister there is Todd Smith, who's re-elected. He was in opposition, re-elected from the riding called Bay of Quinte. So maybe you could just spend a moment or two telling our viewers a little bit more about the ministry, if those who haven't had as much to do with it as you have over time, and what we can expect.
Well, certainly the ministry itself, again, not one of these that necessarily gets the same level of media scrutiny or attention as, say, the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, but certainly one that, particularly from our clients' perspective, is an important one. Deals with things like consumer protection, deals with aspects like Service Ontario, even some of the digital government offerings come oftentimes within this portfolio. So it's certainly it touches on a lot of the programs that government either oversees that have direct consumer impact, or that government delivers directly to consumers that often go through here. So there's a lot of touch points with the public directly, but also a lot of touch points where companies are either saying, why are you looking at us, or why are you getting involved in this area when we deliver it already?
Yeah, and so things like those, you might remember when the previous in the previous legislature, a private member's bill to deal with whether or not loyalty reward points should expire, consumer debt protection, things like that fall under this ministry. I think Doug Ford made a good choice here, because Todd Smith is a good retail politician. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's because he's got some broadcasting in his background. He has the ability to talk to people and explain things in such a way that everybody understands it. And I think this ministry could benefit from some of that.
Oh, absolutely. It's there's a lot that's convoluted that comes out of this ministry that just trying to figure out what exactly it means, what it means for you, is a big issue.
All right. So Todd Smith from Bay of Quinte, Minister of Government and Consumer Services.
He'll also be the government house leader.
He'll also be the government house leader. Thank you. Which is it's a role that has more to do with what happens in the legislature, but each party will have a house leader. where they figure out the agendas and which bill is going forward first. So it's important and often overlooked, as I just overlooked it. So thanks, Brian, for that. Okay, in a what I would consider probably the biggest surprise for me was the new Minister of Education will be Lisa Thompson from Huron-Bruce. So she is re-elected, and I say it's a surprise because during the campaign, Doug Ford had committed that his first Minister of Agriculture would be someone from the farming community. So I just thought it would be Lisa Thompson because she's from the farming community. But I was wrong, and she's now the Minister of Education. So someone that was quite vocal in opposing the closure of rural schools.
And again, another, I would say, well-liked member of the PC caucus. So yeah, there's a few signals we're seeing from this. One is the importance that the rural caucus and rural issues will have within the education system by the fact that Lisa Thompson is the Minister of Education. Also the fact that the parliamentary assistant to Lisa Thompson is actually going to be Sam Oosterhoff, who is a young MPP. I was going to say an age, but I'm realizing I'm not 100% certain on it. I know it's early 20s.
I think he's like Mitch Marner's age, somewhere.
Yeah, like that. Similarly skilled on the ice, is my understanding. Although he can yodel much better than Mitch Marner can. But one of the other things that was prominent about Sam Oosterhoff is also a fairly prominent social conservative, but also had been homeschooled. So we've got two appointees for the Ministry of Education that perhaps are giving some signals that there might be some significant changes to how we approach things, and also I would think signals that would give some further comfort to those who are concerned about the sex ed curriculum and what exactly will be happening with it.
That's a good point. And again, having been around during the days of the Harris government, relations between that government and the teachers' unions were not very good. And I think that there's still a bit of residual to that. And so this minister is really going to have to be up to the challenge of managing those relationships, because I don't think either party, any of them, want a return to those days. Those were awful times. I
don't think the teachers want it either. It wasn't a great time to be a teacher.
That's what I'm talking about. I don't think the government wants to go back there, and I don't think the teachers' unions want to go back there. So I think the minister here has a challenge before her to not let things get there while dealing with curriculum and dealing with sort of the non-contract negotiation part of education, and testing and what kind of math the kids learn. And there was talk of that during the campaign, discovery math, not discovery math. So this is a big task ahead of Lisa Thompson. So that's certainly a portfolio to watch. We'll keep an eye on that and see how she makes out. Okay, so we have one of the rookie MPPs who made it into the Doug Ford cabinet was Michael Tobolo. Michael Tobolo was elected for the first time on June 7th from the riding of Vaughan Woodbridge. Michael Tobolo is a lawyer, been in practice a long time, and
early supporter of Doug Ford's.
I think he may have been the first candidate, not incumbent. He may have been the first candidate that came out and endorsed and supported Doug Ford. So, good call. Yeah. He is now the Minister of Community Safety and Correctional Services. So again, an important role, but not one that garners a lot of media attention until something goes wrong.
Yeah.
Then it gets a lot of attention. So given the kind of summer that we've had in Toronto, for example, this year, This is the minister in charge of the provincial jails and correctional system and provincial policing.
And within the PC platform, there were already some commitments in this particular area. There was a commitment to restore the funding to the anti-gun and anti-gang task force. I can't remember the exact name for it. That had been cut. So that's going to be falling under this portfolio, as well as issues like carding and similar policing issues are going to be within this ministry's purview, and certainly have been given an indication that these are certainly high on the radar of the government coming in.
So on the Canada Day long weekend in the city of Toronto, 10 people were hit by gunfire. Some of them died.
Yeah.
The mayor, who is facing his own re-election in October, has come out quite strongly and said, we need the federal and provincial governments to work with us. We've got to do something here. So I suspect that pretty soon, if not already, Minister Tobolo and our new Attorney General, Caroline Mulroney, are going to be pressed into service to figure something out here. Because I think we are now on pace to pass New York in terms of gun-related homicides, like rate-wise, in 2018. So again,
certainly not a distinction that anyone would cherish.
No. So here you are, you like politics, you run, you win, you want to be a cabinet minister, you're a cabinet minister.
There you go.
Here, go deal with this now. Figure out a way that fewer people get shot in Toronto. So look, we're not meaning to make light of the situation, but sometimes this happens to people that run for elected office. They are charged with dealing with really serious things early on.
And difficult things.
Right? Yeah. So you get sworn in on June 29th, and on July 2nd, you're being called upon to find a solution for this. So we wish Minister Tobolo well. It's certainly the timing of his appointment to this role in cabinet is one that makes the job much more interesting than it might have been, say, in the past. But we'll see how he makes out, and wish him well. All right, because we did this in alphabetical order, the last minister in the
second last.
Oh, I'm sorry. The second last minister.
Last.
Okay. So because we did this in alphabetical order, the next minister we want to talk about is Jim Wilson, who's the new Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation, and Trade. So certainly no stranger, like Ernie Hardeman, elected in 1995 as part of the Mike Harris government. Wilson has been re-elected ever since from the riding of Simcoe Grey. Again, we talked in some of our other cabinet coverage of a name change. Whereas under Kathleen Wynne, this was the Ministry of Economic Development and Growth.
And there was a separate Ministry of International Trade.
That's right. So we now have Jim Wilson doing a job that two ministers used to do. Although in fairness, I'm old enough to remember when it was the Ministry of Economic Development and Trade. So it got split up, now it's put back together.
Just so you don't feel so old, I remember it as well.
Okay.
I'm old enough as well to remember.
Okay, I don't feel so bad then. So it's an interesting position. Wilson's certainly no stranger to the legislature. He was a cabinet minister under Harris. He's been House Leader. He's pretty well done most things that you can do there.
And again, another very well liked, very well respected member of the PC caucus, both within the caucus but also by others outside the caucus, and a very effective politician. So not a surprise then that he would get what is, again, may not have been charged with any of the prominent priorities set out by the Ford administration in terms of their platform, but certainly has a very significant portfolio since we're making Ontario open for business and trying to make sure that there is significant job creation, significant job growth, and prosperity for those in Ontario. This is going to be obviously another key portfolio to advance that. So, giving it to a pair of sure hands there.
Well, I agree with you, and I think now the timing again is such that as NAFTA is happening. So as we're talking to you, Mexico's elected a new president. The president of the United States doesn't look like he's going to let up on things anytime soon. The new Premier of Ontario has publicly stated that he will work strongly with the federal government to protect Ontario jobs as NAFTA is either renegotiated or whatever they end up doing with it. And now Wilson is asked to be the Minister of Economic Development. So I suspect he's going to spend the first part of his time reaching out and talking to business leaders to get a better sense of how all of this would potentially impact them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and certainly job creation, that's a new part of the name for the ministry that was put in place there, which again is in that signaling area of trying to say, here's what we're putting a premium on. And so getting more jobs, creating more jobs is a key driver, key priority for the government, and particularly having that job growth occur not just within Toronto and Ottawa. We've certainly seen on the economic statistics that certainly there have been very significant growth numbers economically in both Toronto and Ottawa, but the rest of the province has faced maybe not stagnation, but not the same levels of growth by any means. And so certainly it's important to make sure that we see some of that growth take place in other parts of the province.
I agree, and I think a positive is that Jim Wilson will be very familiar with the auto industry since the Honda Alliston production facilities reside in his riding. So he comes to this job not being a stranger to that.
Absolutely.
And as I say, having been in the legislature for 23 years, there's not too many things that people like Wilson haven't seen or heard before. So good choice. I think he'll do well. And one concern is that there was some talk during the campaign about eliminating or minimizing some of the programs that the Ontario government has had to recruit and or retain companies and jobs here. I think Wilson, if he doesn't already know, will quickly find out that the Ontario government has to have some tools when they're competing with some of the southern states, the U.S. states, with Quebec. I mean, there's a lot of government participation in trying to get companies to either come or to stay. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things we found under the Harris government is when they did away with a lot of that, the ministers just didn't have the tools they needed to go out there, right, into the world and say, hey, why don't you come and locate your new factory in Ontario? Like, hey, okay, what have you got? You got to have something to put on the table, because as we've seen, places like South Carolina, they are pretty aggressive at enticing companies. So hopefully the Ford government will see the benefit of maintaining all of those programs. They've already said they'll maintain some, but I think if we want to compete with other jurisdictions that are very aggressive, Jim Wilson's going to need to have some tools in his toolkit. All right, good luck, Minister Wilson. We'll see you soon. We have a new Minister of Transportation in Ontario, John Yakubuski. Now, this is someone that, if you've watched Queen's Park at all, you will have heard of him and seen him and heard him in the legislature. Re-elected from the riding of Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke. So it's kind of an interesting part of the province because it's, depending on who you ask, it's Eastern Ontario or it's Northern Ontario or it's both or it's kind of on the border. So again, reflecting the regional representation that's in the cabinet, John Yakubuski is now the Minister of Transportation. Certainly someone that had a lot to say about auto insurance in the past, but as Transportation Minister, provincial roads, highways, subways, LRTs, transit, etc. will now, stewardship of those will transfer over to him.
Well, and it'll be interesting to see as well, we've got one of the agencies that will be under his remit is Metrolinx, which is the provincial agency responsible for a number of different regional transit authorities in the GTA, but also very much a liberal construct. So there is some speculation as to what might happen with respect to Metrolinx, but at the same time, the PC government has also indicated that they will upload the Toronto subway system to the provincial, to make it part of the provincial responsibility, which means that it would be Ministry Yakabuski's responsibility at some point. So how that works together with Metrolinx and also, frankly, just with the TTC's general operations will be a significant part of this portfolio.
That'll take some finessing.
Indeed.
And he's, I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse to be named Minister of Transportation under a premier who just loves subways and is musing all the time out loud about where else we can build subways and add more stops and add more lines. If you're the Minister of Transportation, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it depends on how much money you've got available to you. But the other part is, of course, not to lose sight of the fact that transportation obviously is roads, it's bridges, it's rail, it's airports, not just the public transportation or subway system. So, there's obviously a lot within the remit of this portfolio, and certainly we know that there will be a focus on things like the road system. We know that there will be a focus on rail. We know that there will be a focus on subways. So both, heavy rail as with respect to public transportation, but also heavy rail with respect to transport of goods, so forth. So there's a lot that's within this portfolio. It's a pretty meaty portfolio to deal with.
It is, and I would just add to what Brian said that there were a number of projects that the previous government had announced, but for which work may not have really started yet in any meaningful way. So I think today's government has some options in terms of what they decide to go forward with or not.
Well, or staggering things or so forth, so yeah.
All right. Well, Minister Yakabuski, you got a lot of work ahead. Good luck to you, and we will see you at Queen's Park. So our old friend Jeff Urich has been named the Minister of Natural Resources and Forestry. So Jeff Urich is a returning, re-elected MPP from the riding of Elgin, Middlesex, London. He is actually a pharmacist professionally and served as the PC health critic. And not to say, we told you so, but we were kind of letting people understand that being the critic of one thing doesn't automatically mean you'd be the minister of that thing. So, having said that, Jeff Urich finds himself he's from southwestern Ontario, and he's dealing with a ministry that is largely, though not exclusively, in other parts of the province. I'm curious on the decision here. Now, I know that Urich, because we've dealt with him, is kind of a thoughtful, proceeds cautiously, wants to have information before. He'll never rush into a decision, right? He's somebody that is well considered and thinks things through before diving in. So I certainly didn't expect that this portfolio, I thought he would get into cabinet, but I didn't expect that he would be the Minister of Natural Resources and Forestry. The parks now have been removed from this portfolio and handed over to Rod Phillips at Environment. So we'll have to wait and see what lay ahead and whether or not this signals a change in what we think this ministry will be doing. Oftentimes it's a northerner that or an east, kind of that
more
where
rural
north
based,
meets east. Yeah, and Jeff is certainly. I'm not suggesting that he's ill-suited to do this position. I just was wondering what would take him there, and whether or not you had any insights into how this happened.
No, not particularly. Obviously, government deals with everything within the province, and those people who are within government have certain experiences, but they may not have experiences with every industry out there. Yet they still need to be able to govern accordingly, and with that. So sometimes you do get some of these appointments where it may be not necessarily an obvious connection to the portfolio, but it certainly doesn't mean that they won't perform very well in their
not at all.
portfolio or
Sure.
anything of that sort. So it's oftentimes, as we know, it's really about the skill of the minister as opposed to the expertise of the minister in being an effective minister within their portfolios.
Yeah, I think you may be right, and as mentioned, Uric is the kind of guy that's kind of, he's methodical and he's thoughtful, and being a pharmacist, he's trained to follow instructions exactly, because we work for the Pharmacists Association, and whatever the doctor writes on that paper, that's what's happening. So all kidding aside, we wish Jeff well. Forestry is an important part of Ontario's economy. We're kidding with each other about how Uric ended up there, but by no means do we intend to suggest that the forestry industry is not important. It is, and the natural resources, look, Ontario was largely built
On natural
resources and forestry for the longest time. So I think that that industry will like working. Those industries will like working with Jeff Uric. I think you're going to find him to be an approachable guy that will sit down and listen to you, even if he's not always in a position to say yes to you, as none of these ministers will always be in a position to say yes. But at the end of the day, all you ask for is the opportunity to go in and get a fair hearing for what you have to say, and I'm confident that Jeff Uric will give you that, and we wish him well in his work as Ontario's Minister of Natural Resources and Forestry.
Now, one thing I think that we should also just highlight for clients, beyond the specific cabinet appointees, is certainly the fact that we do expect this to be a very strong Premier's office. Not to say that all power is going to be concentrated there, but we know that as happens frequently with new governments, all of the chiefs of staff to these ministers are actually being centrally appointed. So it's the Premier's office who are putting in place the chiefs of staff into each of those offices. Again, this happens regularly with new governments, so this isn't out of the ordinary. But we have also heard that other appointments within the ministers' offices, so for example, their press secretary, or maybe even their director of policy, will also likely be appointed from the Premier's office, or at least vetted and approved by the Premier's office before that happens. So, certainly with all of these appointments, there's going to be a certain amount of central oversight and influence as well with all of this that certainly people looking to engage with the government will need to keep in mind as well.
No, those are all good points, and I think we've already told a number of our clients that we expect that the new government at Queen's Park will look at things pragmatically rather than through the lens of ideology. I don't think that this group, certainly if the Premier himself is any indication, is going to look at things and say this is not right-wing enough for me. I think it's going to be a case of what is this, why is it important, who does it help, and how much will it cost? Will probably be the lenses through which most proposals are viewed, and really that's what you want when you're going to government with something that they may not have contemplated or included in their platform, or is sort of on their radar screen ahead of time. So I would echo what you said. I mean, there's some real sharp people working in this Premier's office, as is typical in the new government. It's that first term where a lot of the talent is attracted. They will be instrumental, I think, in supporting the Premier and the ministers and the caucus as things unfold. So I would echo that, and I think it's going to be an interesting 4 years. And I think that
well, it's certainly been an interesting at least year leading up to where we are today. So yes.
Yeah, I think Ontario politics changed forever on January 23rd, the night that all that happened. So that's it. We thank you for listening and watching. We welcome your feedback and input as always. We will not be doing a weekly show, but we will be on certain milestone events, creating broadcasts, webcasts for you to watch. We hope you enjoy it, and we look forward to speaking to you soon. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Joe.
And thank you.
Thank you.